Okay. So we several weeks ago started this journey through the third book of the Torah. It's known as Leviticus. In Hebrew, we call it Vayikra. And as narratives go, it's mentioned several times. It's not the easiest narrative. It's a lot more fun when we're talking about Abraham and Sarah and their adventures and adventures in the world and their efforts to bring goodness and godliness to the world. This is, chronologically speaking, I'm just going to shut the door, I'm sorry. Chronologically speaking, this is after the Jews came to Sinai 7 weeks after they left Egypt. They came to Sinai. God orally presented them with the 10 Commandments, and said that Moses would be coming up the mountain for 40 days to absorb the greater portion of the Torah, the principles of the Torah, the wisdom of the Torah, and would come down with those 10 Commandments engraved on stone, which God would provide. Because of what we've mentioned several times, more than several times, the Jewish misbehavior when they thought Moses did not come down in 40 days. They created the golden calf out of their panic, and that was a big problem. Obviously, when Moses comes down, he breaks the tablets, then he asks God for another chance, so he goes back up the mountain for 40 days, and God says, okay, we'll give another chance. Now go down and get some stone, get yourself prepared, and come back again for another 40 days, and I'll give you the tablets. So there are 3 40-day trips up the mountain, and the third trip ends with him coming down the mountain on the 40th day, which is today Yom Kippur. It's the 10th day of Tishrei, is the day he came down, and that was absolution and forgiveness for the Jewish people. The day afterwards, God tells Moses to tell the Jewish people that they should be building a tabernacle. Tabernacle is going to be a place of interface between the human and the divine, and it's in a way a conduit through which they can re-experience going forward in history the divine intimacy they experienced standing at Sinai when God spoke to them. God's not going to be speaking to us every day, at least in a frontal way and in a palpable way. So because Judaism, the program with which they were presented was very much about the fusion, the symbiosis of the spiritual and the physical, and finding the meaning in the physical, not just spurning the physical, but finding the beauty and the meaning and the godliness within our physical human world. Here was an opportunity for them to build a physical building. They're in the desert, so it was portable and collapsible. They carried it with them when they would collapse it and store it on large wagons when they traveled, and when they set up camp, they would set it up again. And that was something that they used as a center for Jewish life for hundreds of years, until King David planned to create the temple, which was really it was the same idea as the tabernacle, but now it was going to be permanent and it was much larger, grander. Excuse me. Here it comes again. And I think we're done now. And King Solomon would build it. Now, a central part of the service in the temple, it's about clearly about the communion of the human and the divine. But in the temple, in the Beis Hamikdash, as we call it, a central part was service of offerings, and often those were with animals, which for us is going to sound bizarre. I eat animals as food, but this is as an offering is harder for us to understand, and I'll put that out there again and again and again, that there were deep spiritual dynamics within this, and we're looking to be able to find what it means to us, because this is not a lesson for us to go and offer animals to God. We can if you know how to do it, we can take a chicken and prepare it for dinner. But it's not something that Torah is very careful about pain to animals, unnecessary pain to animals, and this is something that has to be squared away with that. Now, something I haven't mentioned is that Maimonides wrote, I think it's a time to mention it. Maimonides wrote a book called A Guide for the Perplexed, Moreh Nevuchim in Hebrew. So the idea is, it's a guide for the perplexed. It means he wrote it for people searching in his days, in the 12th century, or in the 12th century. So it's really, and they were there, and they were searching. They were confused about God and spirituality, and many of them were living well, depending on where they were, but they're reconciling God with their human experience and their businesses and their lives was not easy. Searchers and questioners. It didn't just start yesterday. So there he tackles the idea. It's a very rational book. Now, there are many parts in that book, which many of our greats from from Maimonides' time going forward, people who have tremendous respect for Maimonides, they wonder about some of the rationalizations in the Guide for the Perplexed, and whether Maimonides was taking a truth that would make Torah accessible, a level of truth that would make Torah accessible to people who did not have a faith foundation that with which to approach Torah, or a strong faith foundation. But it's not like Maimonides felt himself really bought the rationalization as the reasons for things he said. So in other words, if he gave a reason for abstaining from meat and milk, and he does give a reason for abstaining from meat and milk, Maimonides knows very well that God gave no reason, and that this is about us surrendering to God. But he gave a reason just to make it a little more, and not a fake reason, a reasoning that one can extrapolate from the idea and assume from the idea of as the Torah presents it and the Talmud presents it. And he wanted to make it a little more user-friendly, kind of smooth the path into a Torah world. So when he writes about offerings, he writes pretty extensively about it, and he writes that the Jews to whom God gave the Torah lived in a pagan world, and overwhelmingly, you never say it's never 100%, but it's overwhelmingly, by and large, the world had a bunch of different idolatrous cults. And as the Jews came into Israel, the Canaanite cults, they all brought animal offerings, and they all had spiritual dynamics that were very attractive to the Jews, and they were connected often to these offerings, the animal offerings. So what Maimonides says is that God had mercy on us and understanding the human condition which God himself gave us, said going cold turkey or just turning on a dime is not an easy thing for people. So therefore, if God would just say, just stop everything, don't do anything that either that you grew up with or that you see around you and you see as normal, and now I'm going to give you a totally new structure for life and leave that behind. God said, I'm going to incorporate some animal offerings into a holy purview, into a holy rubric, and through that they will be able to be Jews, to be able to follow my law. But it's not going to be as traumatic for them because they're going to be able to do some of the things that they see as intrinsically spiritual, but they're just doing it in a Torah rubric. a lot of either his contemporaries and later rabbis have some issues with that rationalization, but he is Maimonides, and so he's a sophisticated approach to spirituality and to religion. It's probably fair to say that what he's saying certainly has a basis in Torah. He would never say something that doesn't have a basis in Torah, but we can scaffold or scale one's entry into Torah, and this was putting it out there as an easier, more palatable way in for some people. So we have discussed some of the animal offerings. Now, another part of the animal part of it, and just understanding just as an approach goes, Scripture tells us in Ecclesiastes, it says, God put the world into our hearts, individual hearts. What does that mean? One way of interpreting that is that we each reflect the world. And we look at the world around us, we're part, it's all part of us, and we're all part of the world. And therefore, and the Medrash looks at it, even topography and geography, hills, valleys, and so on, and looks at the human being and says, how can we see that all reflected in you? It goes for the animal world too. That the animals, we look at animals not only as objects that plow our fields and are fun to watch, or that we eat for dinner, or whatever it is, or give us eggs. There's a part of them in us. We're connected to the animals. So one of the things that we had started, didn't finish, so the Hasidic Insight on page 11, which is where we start, is that there is a mystical analysis of three basic categories of animal life. What we're going to call mammals, probably heavier animals is one of the ways to talk about it, fowl, and fish. Now, in the dry, just the functional halacha, the functional Jewish law about how we deal with these animals, some of them are kosher, some of them aren't kosher, as far as species is concerned. And then, once we've defined a kosher species, as I have a cow in front of me, which is a kosher species of mammal, and I have a chicken in front of me, which is a kosher species of fowl, and I'm right near a pool where there's a tuna swimming, which is a kosher species of fish. So I look at that, and I'm going to say, first of all, I'm going to say they are all somehow reflected in me. Before I get to that, I want to say that all of them, if the conditions are correct, my job is to try to make this world a better place, bring these objects also to a more productive place. And sometimes that's by eating them. And for those of us who aren't vegetarian, to eat them, but to use them and make a blessing, I have God in mind, and I'm going to use the energy and the nutrients to do something good with my life. So therefore, they are part of the equation of the mitzvahs I do. They are powering my mitzvahs. But we need to take these animals and make them appropriate for my soul. They're going to be empowering, not just my body, but my soul. We live in a spiritual, physical world. So how do I take this cow? And because a cow it's an animal, it's morally neutral. It could be cute, maybe it has a good nature, some have a bad, a kind of nature or a less kind of nature, but it's all their nature, and it's their instinct, but it's morally neutral, and it doesn't have the self-awareness to be able to say, I'm not going to whack that guy with my tail because it hurts. If he's moving his tail, he's moving his tail. I don't think unless he means to hurt someone. Just or to sit down on that thing. It's not. It can't. It's hard. I can't get into a cow's mind so much. But if you think about it with a dog, the dog doesn't say to itself, "I'm not going to pee in the carpet because they just shampooed it." It doesn't do that. You teach teach a dog to behave in the house, but it's from what I understand, and Helen Helen can correct me, is it's a Pavlovian, but it doesn't have the self-awareness and the self-analysis to say, oh, look at the pain in my beloved owner's eyes. I'm not gonna pee in the corner.
Well, that's not always true.
No. Okay. So this is the Torah perspective on animal life. I haven't seen anything to counter it as far as understanding how animals work. So with the cow, and the cow it's a heavy animal, and in that sense also, like a steak is heavier when we eat it. I think we can all agree than a chicken cutlet. So in order to bring that cow, and we discussed this last week, that cow to a level where it's suitable for me, for my life, for my soul, I have to slaughter it correctly. Slaughtering, the Talmud says, use the language, we're elevating it. And there are some complex details to make sure it's done right. Because done right, obviously we want to also want to do it quickly, and it's I haven't looked at this recently, but years ago I looked into some of the science of it about that in the way we slaughter, an animal goes unconscious before it can feel pain, and I hope that's true. So that I saw that not from Torah sources, I saw that from scientific sources, looking into Torah. So it's complex. It's complex partially because it's a complex process to take something so earthy, so physical as a cow or a steak, and make it appropriate for my system, my soul, or yours. When it comes to a fowl, the fowl, the fowl is slaughtered pretty much in the same way, in some regards, in the same way as the cow, but there's less of the complexity. We say there's less of the complexity because for something as a lighter animal, so to speak, which isn't as earthy or animalistic, to find the right word, as a cow, this is a little bit more appropriate for a refined human, for soul, and to be able to more easier to ingest, and we can plug it in more easily. But it needs a process to make it kosher. With the tuna or with fish, actually no process is necessary. It's just gathering it in. As the Talmud says, gathering it in, it's shchita, that is it's slaughtering. What does it mean? In other words, that's what elevates it. So there with the fish, there's no slaughtering. There's nothing. I can't eat it alive, but I eat it. I can eat it without any elevation, so to speak. And that's one of the things we say, that fish is even more appropriate, more naturally appropriate for our systems, for our souls, and that's reflected by the fact that it spends its life in water. Water is a godly medium for the world. In the creation of the world, mass was first covered by water. Babies is in an amniotic sac. Water is cleansing, spiritual cleansing, rebirth, the mikveh, and therefore, since it spends its time in water, and none of us know how a fish thinks, but if it processes it, means it sees its life source consistently. We don't see the oxygen that really is enabling us to live right now. So someone could have, if they're not educated, they may see themselves as being totally independent, not dependent on anything for their lives. We're all very dependent on something else for our lives, beginning with oxygen. But then there's also God and other stuff. It's, there's a certain opening for a human arrogance to think, I don't need anything. I'm not dependent on anything. We're all dependent. And then a knowledge of the dependency is a very important element, a humbling element, to know that we're not the center of the universe. We are important in God's world, vitally important in God's world, because we're, and a proof of that is that we're alive, so God needs us. But the world is more more than about us and our particular desires. It's what we're needed for. So a fish surrounded by water, with all the things we just said about water, and even it's a symbol of consciousness, of knowing, of being aware of our higher source. It's very spiritual. Off topic a second, but when Jacob blessed his grandchildren before he was going to pass away, Menashe and Ephraim, Joseph's sons, and he blessed that they would be able to be. The Hebrew of it is a little. He said that they would proliferate in the land, but the language is a little funny. The language is that they should be like fish on land. And so there should be multiple like fish on land. But the idea is bringing the fish consciousness to their land life. Fish consciousness is that you never forget your source. So that's the idea of the scale of heavy animals, fowl, and fish. There we have different ways, different process of making them bring up to be appropriate for us. Now, they also reflect, since as I mentioned before, they're also all reflected in us. What we mentioned here is the mystical idea is that there's a part of me, or maybe a behavioral mode that I can fall into, which is more the cow, very earth-based, and I want to sleep, eat, and be comfortable. The fowl, which is able to fly, symbolizes to us something that is an animal. It's not a fish, but it has the capacity to soar, has the capacity to get beyond the earth, to be able to look down on the earth, to be able to see it from a higher perch. And in mystical thinking, that part represents our mind, our thinking, because there's a part of me, part of all of us, that just wants creature comforts. That's all it wants. It's just very instinctive, very impulsive. It just wants creature comforts. Religious or not, our minds can take us to a different place. Our minds give us first, as humans, we have the capacity for self-analysis. We can go to higher, more elevated levels of thinking and living. And therefore, the fowl represents something which may not be holy per se, but it's and certainly people use their minds. Brilliant people use their minds to do horrible things sometimes, but it's a tool of where we can get to be more of a mensch, not so mired in the physical. And so that's a different behavioral pattern on a part of us. We all have minds, and we can exercise that. We have the part of us that just wants whatever it is, the hot dog or the fried tofu, whatever you eat. And then there's part of us that could put our mind into higher ideas, study, think, meditate. And the fish represents a state of being in which we're kind of totally surrounded in holiness. And it's that there's a clarity of who we are, why we are, and who we have to thank for our existence. So we went through that up until that was last week. Now we're up to page 11, the Hasidic Insights. We didn't finish it. There's a little mark on what I sent out. It's on the right page, the second paragraph we're up to. Now here, we're going to analyze, because what we had said in the scripture that we spoke about last week was that there was something odd about the fowl that was brought in, fowl offering that was brought in the temple, in the tabernacle as an offering. We say instead of like we do today, the slaughtering from the front of the throat, and we do it quickly and so on, but it's with a knife. And in the offerings, really anybody was able to do that. The Kohen was the priestly functionary, but the slaughtering was whoever was doing it. They were doing as God's emissary. This had to be done by a Kohen, and what was done was the Kohen would slit the throat from the back of the neck, and it would keep his thumbnail, the thumbnail long to be able to do that and sharp. Now, we'll get into that a little bit, some of the spiritual significance. Our intellect and emotions are reflected in expressions on our faces. The front of the body, therefore, signifies spiritual life lived in a normal, rational manner. Proper behavior inspired by emotions engendered by the intellect. The back of the head, on the other hand, is devoid of expression, thus signifies a spiritual life imposed by coercion and discipline, proper behavior, but devoid of emotion or inspiration. I don't know if those words worked for you. Let me tell you how I would explain it. In the significance, just looking at our own human life, when you're talking to someone who matters, and you're talking about something that matters, you look at them, if you can, if they're there, you look at them in the eye, and you connect with them, and you can see in their eyes and their faces, and they can see in your eyes and your face, they're an expression of what's going on inside of you. There's a giving and there's a bond that we're giving to each other. Certainly, if the one talking is expressing. If there's something that doesn't matter so much, you might say, "Can you mind shutting the window?" or whatever. It's something that you're not giving yourself into it, and you don't have to turn your face to look the person in the eye. There are times you might not want to look the person in the eye. Example, it would be, let's say, in the old days when they gave out paychecks. I don't know if they do, they're probably all direct deposit today. But if someone was really upset at an employee, and it's payday, so you got to give the paycheck. But some employees, you take us have a great weekend because you really there's a relationship there, and you're happy to be giving them the check. And this person, you try to make sure to be on the phone or looking away when you hand them the check because you'd rather show them the back of your head, not your face. So the face is how we in expressing ourselves, and the Torah has this idea with this blessing, may God shine his face. What was that? God doesn't have a face like we do. It means the full flow, full body. So there's the giving of the body of self is through the face and the front. The neck, the back is something which is not the full on giving of emotion and so on. However, and there's the language, and similar to this, the language for stubbornness in Hebrew, in the Torah, and we're called the stubborn people. It's kshei oruf, means it's stiff-necked, wide-necked. The idea is that the neck is in the back. When you look at my neck, you're not getting a taste for my feeling. You're hearing my voice. Similarly, in that arena, the idea of doing something because I have to do it. I don't understand it. I don't feel for it, but this is something I have to do. That's a good stubbornness. That's called stiff-necked. It also will mean, so and the opposite is not doing what I have to do, even though it doesn't make sense that I'm just digging in my heels, stiff-necked. So doing the neck represents part of the personality which isn't showing the intellect, the emotions, the enthusiasm. It's just there, and we're doing or not doing what we need to do. So here we're talking in a positive way. We're doing what we need to do. So here, it's proper behavior but devoid of emotion or inspiration. And sometimes we have to do that, right? You tell your loved ones or your kids or anyone you're teaching, you don't feel like saying saying thank you. You say it anyway. You don't feel like holding a door open for someone. You do it anyway. You work on the feelings later because you'd like to be someone with there's the integrity of the feeling and the actions. But sometimes you just got to do the right thing because it's the right thing. Do what you got to do. So that's what the back, the neck would suggest. So when we come to a mammal, and we're talking about like slaughtering a cow, but here we're talking about the mammal within us, which is a person who has succumbed to the forces of materialism. That person must always have recourse to his neck. Supra-rational discipline. For he cannot rely upon his heart and mind having reached any degree of divine consciousness. A person who is mired in a very self-oriented world, and so they're opening themselves up to a mode of behavior. Obviously, the ideal is to meditate, contemplate, feel, and then act. But it's very important that they have the backstop and the foundation that this is what I'm going to do. This is what it's what my doctor told me, my therapist told me, it's what I see it needs to be done. And therefore the mammal needs to have the neck. What does that mean? So therefore in the slaughtering, we kind of leave the neck, we come in from the throat. Super-rational discipline, for he cannot rely upon his heart and mind having reached any degree of divine consciousness. Therefore, he cannot be slaughtered from the back of the neck. This aspect of his psyche must remain intact. A fowl, we said a fowl is a bit more elevated. That's a person who has succumbed to, a fowl is an intermediate. Under normal circumstances, it is much the same. And fundamentally, a fowl is also an animal. His animal drives are fully functional, albeit held in check. But upon being brought as a sacrifice to God in the holy temple, at times of great spiritual awakening, the intermediate person is transformed. So here we're saying, normally speaking, when we slaughter a chicken, it also goes through the throat because it also needs its neck. Because it's not it's rational, it's intelligent, but rational and intelligent don't necessarily make for a good person. But it's a way in. So that person also needs this idea of at least access to this idea of I'm doing the right thing because it's right, even if I'm not feeling it right now. But that's a normal slaughtering where, for people's lunch. The temple ambiance was different. In the temple, this is a place where it's dedicated to the fusion of the human and the divine. At this point, what we're insinuating is that the fowl within us, the person exercising logic but isn't fully in a fully holy mode of living. It's at a time of spiritual awakening, the intermediate person is transformed. He no longer, or she needs the yoke on the nape of his neck. For his complete focus on God enables him to serve him with him, meaning God, with his own intellect and emotion. So there are certain environments where we don't have to just force ourselves to do the right thing. We're in an inspired environment, inspiring environment, and therefore, such as the temple, and therefore we can go from the neck. We can cut that. Besides the location of the decision, ritual slaughter and nipping, the nipping is what they call the thing from the neck, differ with regard to whom may perform and how they are performed. I mentioned that before, that any person can do the slaughtering in the temple, of the normal type of slaughtering, but the nipping had to be done by a kohen. Ritual slaughter, even of sacrifices, may be performed by a layperson, but must be performed with a properly prepared knife. Nipping may only be performed by a priest and is performed with the priest's thumbnail. In the process of ritual slaughter, the slaughterer is considered the agent of God who affects the elevation of the animal, similar to the way divine discipline must be externally imposed on the spiritually underdeveloped wicked person. Therefore, it makes no difference who slaughters the animal. Both priest and layman act as God's agent. So, in part of the offering was that it's almost vicariously we're giving ourselves to God, just like the animals being given to God here, and we're still staying alive, but we're giving ourselves to God through the animal. And here, God is bringing us to this level of connectedness. It's, as we say, it's God is the one affecting the elevation of the animal urn here. And similar to the way divine discipline must be externally imposed on a spiritually underdeveloped person. So therefore, they make a difference. It's God's doing it through human hands. Nipping, however, the priest is acting as his own agent. In nipping, it's the Kohen doing God's work, but it's not as God's agent. He kills the fowl directly with his own hand, not even using a knife. In this way, he expresses how the more spiritually developed intermediate person involves his own intellect and emotions in his relationship with God. It's not, we are very happy to have God affect connectedness between us. It's a gift. But how much better if we created ourselves? Therefore, only the priest who performs the rest of the sacrificial ritual may perform the nipping. It comes more from within the human condition. Similarly, when we're engaged in intense prayer and a Torah study, we can reach the level signified in the temple by vow. Thus, the synagogue and house of study are considered a miniature temple. Talmud calls it a miniature holy temple, a synagogue or a yeshiva. At such times of heightened spiritual awareness, our relationship with God rises to a higher level, for we're no longer threatened by external distractions. As a result, we can concentrate fully on connecting with our Creator, which is a reason that it's healthy to be in good environments and spiritually supporting environments. Okay, so that was a mouthful, but unless there are questions, we can move to page 12. And this will be a little bit more palatable to Ellen. We're going to talk about grain offerings. So we'll talk about them soon. I want to read some of the verses, and then we'll start to delve into a little bit. A person could bring a heavy animal, fowl, and there's an option for a number of grain offerings. Let's look at chapter 2, verse 1, page 12. If the offerer cannot afford a fowl, he may sacrifice a grain offering instead. There are 5 types of grain offerings: unbaked, baked into loaves, baked into flat cakes, matzahs, fried in a shallow frying pan, and fried in a deep frying pan. We will first describe the differences between them, and then the general procedures common to all of them. If a person declares his intention to bring a grain offering to God without specifying which type he intends to bring, his offering must be of the first type, meaning of unbaked fine wheat flour prepared as follows. He must take at least 1 log, which is about 11.6 ounces of olive oil. He must pour this olive oil over 1/10 of an ephah, about 2.5 quarts of flour. Stir in the flour until the oil is thoroughly mixed with it. They put it this way, but some of the commentators will say, the Talmudic opinions would be that you first put oil in, and then you put in the flour, and then you put more oil. Okay, and then pour out. And we'll talk about some of this. Then pour out the rest of the oil on top of the dough. You must then place a fistful of frankincense upon it, taking care not to let the frankincense mix with the commingled flour and oil. The olive oil used for all grain offerings need not be that obtained. The oil obtained when the olives are first crushed. It can be that produced by pressing the olives after they've been crushed, because the oil for the menorah had to be from the first oil, first crushing. This did not need that. Even that produced by grinding them after they had been pressed. In other words, less, it's more virgin, but it's a different, less refined oil. Let's go 13 a bit, and then let's take it to the bottom of the page, and then we can talk about it a little bit. Must then bring the grain offering to Aaron's descendants, the priests, because from this point on, the sacrificial procedures are to be performed by them. As will be described presently, the priest must bring the grain offering to the altar. After having done this, and while standing anywhere in the forecourt or even from outside it, there the offerer first gave, where the first offerer first gave him the grain offering, the priest must scoop out a precise fistful. And I'm going to show you. I hope be able to show you just a diagram or how the fistful is in Hebrew. It's called a kmitza. This was part of the service and how it looked. How it was done. Scoop out a precise fistful of the mixture of the grain offerings, fine flour and oil. He does this by inserting his open hand into the mixture, closing his middle 3 fingers on the palm of his hand, and removing the excess by running his 2 fingers along the sides, down the sides of his closed 3 fingers. I'll show you this. We will presently see that salt must be added to all grain offerings. So the Torah doesn't say it here, but later in this Torah portion, we'll say that everything salt. We'll talk about when we get to that spot. Salt had to be on every offering where they're burned up on the altar. But this fistful must consist only of the grain offerings, flour and oil, apart from its frankincense or any salt. The priest should therefore be careful not to collect any frankincense in his fistful. However, after removing the fistful and placing it in the vessel, must gather all the frankincense and place it on top of the fistful. The priest must then bring the fistful with its frankincense to the top of the altar, salt it, and then burn up the whole combination as the grain offerings memorial portion on the altar. These ingredients are termed the grain offerings memorial portion, since it causes the offerer to be remembered, so to speak, on high. Removing the memorial portion from the main mixture must be performed with the intention that it be an offering destined to be consumed by fire and that it be pleasing to God. So just stop for a second here, or a little bit. Actually, you know something? I'm sorry, here somebody has something. So what does Torah mean when it says that Jews are stiff-necked people? It means stubborn, on the face of it, it means stubborn in a negative way. But in Hasidic thought, we say it because in the actual language of the Torah, where it says that, it says they are a stiff-necked people. It's by the golden calf. And then Moshe says that they are stiff-necked people. And then it says, so, and then please forgive them. So please forgive them because they messed up. But Chassidus thought we say please forgive them because they're stiff-necked, because they're stubborn for you too. They're stubbornly connected to Judaism. So I just want to note a few things. First of all, here in the when we read in the first verse of it, when it said in the chapter 2, verse 1, where it says if a person declares his intention to bring a grain offering to God, it uses the language nefesh. It says if a soul, doesn't say a person actually, I have no problem with it translating it that way, but it says a soul will bring an offering to God. It doesn't use that language in the other offerings. And this is because this is specifically a person who could not afford the more elaborate offerings. And one can only imagine their feelings as they walk into the temple, or they come to the temple and they can't bring something that they'd really like to bring, that the neighbors or other family members are bringing. That's a really a more glorious type of offering, or something that they're able to afford something beautiful, an expensive animal, whatever. But that is actually, we say that that's very special to God. We say that's a soul offering. And not it's stripped of a lot of there's of the possible ego layers that could come with a more expensive offering. There is a point to an expensive offering, and someone who has the means to be able to give of themselves that way is an important thing. But this is something that was more clearly a soul offering. This is it's and that's really something we want to really apply and spread to any other level of offering. The wealthy person should learn from the poor person with the soulfulness. Again, it's generalizing the soulfulness of the more financially, physically meager offering, and the humility that comes. And that's what it says benefesh, that this they call the soul. Um, I want to, we said about the fistful. I just want to show you, just for our, so this is something of the internet. It's the three fingers had to be over. Now, the thumb, right, you have some stuff falling through here, but the thing is, it was dough, so it didn't fall so easily, often anyway. Or what it was mixed with, it was flour together with oil, but you wanted to keep what was in the three fingers. So with the thumb and the pinky, you'd wipe off any excess. Now, here, I want to show you something else. 1 second. So here is, you say, on the bottom here, let me see if I can get this a little bigger. Okay, the bottom there is, so this is like in a vessel, and there's flour that has oil in it. So you put the hand in, and there's a debate. Either, I just stop this for a second. A debate whether the hand goes in like this. Let me just see if you can see me. It goes in like this, and then turn it over and do the three fingers, or does it go in palm down, or does it go in actually? I don't know if you can see it, but with on the side of the hand, and then move it up. And there's significance to all of those. Let me just go back to this diagram. So here the hand is coming in. I don't know if it's the back of the hand or it's more vertical. It's hard to see. Maybe they did that deliberately. And then you fold the three fingers and turn the hand upward. You fold the three fingers. You take it. You turn your hand upward and lift the hand out. And there also there's stuff. So this is something called. And I got this off the internet. The Kohen holds his hand open and vertical, puts it into the mincha. Vertical. Okay, so that's the opinion they're taking. Folds his three middle fingers against his palm, turns his hand upward, and lifts it out of the vessel. The mixture which now holds is what's called the kometz, and that's the language of the scripture of the Torah. To take a fistful, a kometz. It's a kamitza. Okay.
Mendy, I have a question about that.
Of course.
I don't remember people doing this in Basking Ridge, but when we went to the villages, there's a lot of Sephardic people, and when they lift the Torah, they
Right, they stick out their pinky.
Yeah, does that come from that?
I don't think so. I know what you're saying in it, because there's a similarity. I don't believe that it is. It's they're like reaching towards the Torah, as though, because one of the things when the Torah comes out, there's an idea of going forward to the Torah and touching it and giving a kiss out of respect for the Torah. So this is not going there, but like reaching out as though with it's almost like an attempt to touch it. But they do it with only one finger. I don't know why they do it to the pinky. If I remember, I'll try and look and see if there's a specific. We don't do that, but I definitely have seen that many times. I know what you're talking about.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so now it says, okay, the remainder of the grain offering, let's go back to verse 3. The remainder of the grain offering will belong to the priests. First Aaron, or after him, the priest then in office, must take whatever portion of it he chooses, and then his sons or after them, the officiating priests must take whatever is left, dividing it up among them. And the priests must then bake the mixture any way they like. But the portion is still considered an offering of superior holiness, and therefore they may only eat it from the point in time when the memorial portion is burned on the altars on the fire offerings of God. Okay, so I mentioned before about memorial. Let's just finish the paragraph. I want to talk about that for a second. If, however, the offerer himself is a priest, then no memorial portion is removed from this grain offering, for it must be burned up in its entirety. None of it may be eaten. It does, however, still require oil and frankincense. We'll get more to the oil and the frankincense and the flour next week. But just as far as the memory, it certainly seems that this is something like we're reminding God about ourselves, and that language is one that we find in our Rosh Hashanah davening quite a bit. And I mention it every year because it sounds kind of odd that we believe in a God who might forget us, because we don't believe in a God who might forget us. But remembering is even with us in the human condition, it means that if there's something that I know about, and it may be even been, humming in the back of my mind, but it comes to the forefront of my mind because I can't think about two things at once. And now I'm thinking about this, but when it's finished with the Zoom and that person walks in, it's frontal. The idea of it's not that God could forget us. It's that, first of all, and because it's really an interactive universe, when we make godliness, holiness, a center of our radar screen, and we bring it up, it's also called remembering. It's not like we forget God. It's just right now we're thinking about something else. But the focus is something that we call remembering, and that triggers, like everything else, a mirror reaction response from God, where now, although God never forgot us, now we are directly in the radar screen for God's giving and connecting. So that's what we hope for in Rosh Hashanah. Not that God should remember us, but that since we have put godliness into the front of our radar screen, it's reciprocal, and there's this connection, this total connection with each other. And here, especially when you have a person who's described as unable to bring a more impressive offering and is giving of themselves, this is the language. First of all, the language is called a carbon mincha. It's not just called an offering; it's called an offering that's a gift. Why is this more of a gift than anything else? It's a gift because the soul giving is a gift. Sometimes you can get a gift from someone, and they just whatever it is, because it's perfunctory because they need it to. But then there's a soul gift, and here that's more of a more salient part of this. So going to 4, if you declare your intention to bring a grain offering baked in an oven, it must consist of either 10 unleavened loaves made out of 1/10 of an ephah of fine wheat flour mixed with a log of oil, or of 10 flat unleavened cakes made out of, and this is matzah. Then we're approaching Purim and Pesach, so we're going to have some of the matzah motif here, made out of 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour smeared with a log of oil. Either keep smearing them with oil until the log is used up, or smear them with the oil in the form of the Greek letter lambda. And we have that figure there, which is an angular form of the Hebrew letter chaf. We probably wouldn't see it that way, although the chaf we're used to, but that's it in the ancient writing of Hebrew. There was much more of that. The initial letter of the why chaf, because that's the initial letter of the word for priest, which is Kohen, and we have the Hebrew there. And give the rest of the log, which is the measurement of oil, to the priests to consume separately. After baking the dough, and in the case of the flat cakes, after applying the oil, break each of the 10 loaves in 2, and then each half in 2, so the priest will later be able to easily remove the memorial portion. And let me just finish off this page. If a grain offering fried in a shallow frying pan is for sacrifice, it must be made of 1/10 of an ephah of fine wheat flour. Flour is first placed in a vessel containing some of the required log of oil. It is then mixed with some more of this oil and kneaded into 10 loaves. It is then baked in the frying pan. Since the pan is shallow, Since the pan is shallow, the oil will burn up before it can soften the dough. So the resulting loaves will be crisp. And the flour must be unleavened. And we're going to come up on that soon. Also in Torah, that there was no leavening, no chametz allowed. Not only Passover, just there as part of the offering. So, if there are any questions,
Rabbi?
Yes, ma'am.
Were all men able to make these offerings? Were there some that, because I know there's a hierarchy of who can do what within the And then
Well,
as a follow-up to that,
1 second. So all women definitely made offerings. They brought offerings, but men, no, I couldn't have brought this offering. I could have brought it to a Kohen to bring the offering. So the Kohens were the functionaries, and my wife could have also brought an offering.
thank you.
By the way, it wasn't exclusively Jews either necessarily.
Really?
Nope.
But how would this be even communicated to non-Jews?
We were advertising it, but there are stories in the Talmud about because the theme of what was going on in the temple, especially Sukkot, but in general, was that it was asking for God's blessings to the world. And Rabbi said that if when they had no power, they said if the nations of the world would know, what we're praying, what we're affecting, they would send their armies to surround and protect the temple, not to come and attack it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if there's nothing else, wish you a great week. Onward and upward.